The scorching summer sun beat down on Elizabeth Zachary's face as she trudged along the dusty trail toward Colorado City, sweat trickling down her neck and dampening her already soiled traveling dress. 3 days without proper rest had left dark circles beneath her once vibrant green eyes, but the promise of a new life teaching at the Colorado City schoolhouse kept her weary legs moving forward. The year was 1876, a time of opportunity and peril alike in the untamed Colorado territory. Elizabeth paused to take a sip from her canteen, grimacing at the warm, metallic taste of the water. Something wasn't right about it, but she had no choice but to drink. The next town was still miles away according to her weathered map, and the relentless heat showed no mercy. "Just a few more hours," she whispered to herself, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair back into her disheveled bun. "Just a few more hours and you'll have a proper bed, Elizabeth." The distant silhouette of Colorado City appeared like a mirage on the horizon. Elizabeth squinted, wondering if her exhaustion was playing tricks on her vision. But no, those were indeed building civilization after days of traveling by stagecoach and then on foot after the wheel had broken and the other passengers had chosen to wait for the next coach. She couldn't afford to delay. The school term would begin in just 4 days. By midday, the first signs of illness struck. A dull ache in her stomach turned to cramping, and dizziness made the path ahead blur and shift. Elizabeth stumbled, catching herself against a large boulder by the side of the trail. Something was very wrong. "The water," she mumbled, realization dawning on her feverish mind. "The water from that last creek crossing." Her legs gave way, and Elizabeth collapsed to her knees on the dusty ground. The town was visible now, not more than a mile away, but it might as well have been 100 for all the strength she had left. Darkness edged her vision as she fought to stay conscious, desperately scanning the landscape for help. That's when she saw him. A lone rider approaching from the direction of town, his broad-shouldered silhouette dark against the bright sky. Elizabeth tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. She raised a weak arm instead, praying he would see her. Owen Everett had never planned to ride out today. At 30 years old, he had long since established a routine as Colorado City's most reliable rancher and occasional deputy when Sheriff Miller needed an extra hand. But something intuition, perhaps, had urged him to check the southern trail after hearing rumors of coyotes harassing travelers. His sharp eyes caught the movement by the trail, a flash of faded blue fabric against the red-brown earth. Spurring his chestnut mare forward, he quickly closed the distance, his heart hammering as he made out the crumpled form of a woman. "Madam," he called, jumping from his horse before it had fully stopped. "Madam, can you hear me?" Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his deep voice, relief washing over her fevered face. "Help," she managed, her voice cracked and dry. "The water, poisoned, I think." Owen knelt beside her, taking in her flushed cheeks and the trembling of her hands. He'd seen this before: alkali poisoning or maybe something worse in the water. Without hesitation, he removed his bandana, wet it with clean water from his own canteen, and pressed it to her forehead. "I'm Owen Everett," he said, his voice steady despite his concern. "I've got a ranch just outside of town. What's your name, madam?" Elizabeth Zachary," she whispered. "The new schoolteacher." Owen nodded, his blue eyes serious beneath the brim of his worn hat. "Miss Zachary, you're in no condition to walk into town. I need to get you somewhere safe with clean water. Do you understand?" Elizabeth attempted to nod, but the movement sent waves of nausea through her. She barely managed to turn her head before retching painfully, her empty stomach heaving with nothing to expel. Tears of humiliation stung her eyes. "Don't you worry about that," Owen said gently, supporting her. "No shame in being sick. Now I'm going to put you on my horse. Think you can hold on if I'm right behind you?" "I'll try," she whispered, with careful strength. Owen lifted Elizabeth as if she weighed nothing, years of ranch work having hardened his tall frame. He placed her atop his horse and climbed up behind her, one arm securely around her waist as she leaned back against his chest, too weak to sit upright. "There's a spring about 2 miles from here," he explained, urging his mare forward at a gentle pace. Cleanest water you'll find in the territory. My pa found it years ago when he first settled here. Elizabeth could only nod weakly, her consciousness fading in and out as they rode. The solid warmth of Owen behind her was the only thing keeping her from falling. She didn't know this man, this stranger who had appeared like an answered prayer, but in that moment, she trusted him completely. Owen felt the schoolteacher's body burning with fever against his chest and pushed his mare a little faster, careful not to jostle his passenger too much. The spring lay in a sheltered canyon on the edge of his property, accessible by a narrow trail few knew about. The water there was crystal clear and cold year-round, bubbling up from deep underground, untainted by the mineral deposits that poisoned many of the territory's water sources. "Stay with me, Miss Zachary," he urged when he felt her go limp in his arms. "Not much farther now." Elizabeth heard his voice as if from underwater, distant and echoing. She tried to respond but couldn't form words. Her world had narrowed to the rhythmic movement of the horse, the secure arm around her waist, and the burning fire in her veins. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only 30 minutes, the trail dipped downward into a small, verdant canyon that appeared like an emerald oasis amid the dusty landscape. Cottonwood trees provided dappled shade over a clear pool fed by a spring emerging from between two large boulders. Owen carefully dismounted, then lifted Elizabeth down. "Here we are," he said, carrying her to the edge of the spring. "This water will help." He propped her against a smooth boulder and dipped his canteen into the spring. "Small sips now," he instructed, holding the canteen to her cracked lips. The water was like nothing Elizabeth had ever tasted, sweet and cold, instantly soothing her parched throat. She took a small sip, then another, feeling each one revive her slightly. "That's it," Owen encouraged, "slow and steady." He wet his bandana again and bathed her face and neck, alarmed at the heat radiating from her skin. "Miss Zachary, I need to get more of this water into you, and then we need to cool you down. That fever's dangerous high." Elizabeth nodded weakly, understanding through her delirium. "Please," she whispered, "help me." Owen hesitated only a moment before making his decision. "I'm going to have to put you in the shallow part of the spring. The cold water will bring down your fever. It's not entirely proper, but I don't see another way." Under different circumstances, Elizabeth might have been scandalized by the suggestion, but the fire consuming her from within left no room for propriety. "Do what you must," she managed, with careful movements. Owen removed her boots and stockings, then lifted her into his arms once more. He waded into the shallow edge of the spring, the cold water reaching his knees, and slowly lowered Elizabeth until the water covered her legs and soaked the lower half of her dress. Elizabeth gasped as the cold water touched her fevered skin, the shock almost painful at first. Owen supported her back with one arm, keeping her upper body partially out of the water while using his free hand to scoop water over her arms and shoulders. "I know it's cold," he said apologetically, "but we need to break that fever before it does worse damage." For nearly an hour, Owen kept Elizabeth in the spring, periodically helping her drink more of the clean water. Gradually, her skin cooled and some clarity returned to her eyes. "There you are," Owen said with relief when she finally focused on his face. "Welcome back, Miss Zachary." Elizabeth looked up at the face of her rescuer clearly for the first time. Weathered by sun and wind, his features were strong but kind, deep-set blue eyes beneath straight brows, a straight nose, and a firm jaw softened by the genuine concern in his expression. His light brown hair curled slightly where it met his collar. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life, Mr. Everett." "Owen, please," he replied with a small smile. "And you're not out of danger yet. We need to get you somewhere you can rest properly. My ranch house isn't far." Elizabeth suddenly became acutely aware of their situation. She was half submerged in water, her dress clinging to her legs, in the arms of a man she'd just met. Heat that had nothing to do with her fever colored her cheeks. Owen noticed her discomfort and misinterpreted it. "Are you feeling worse again?" "No," Elizabeth said quickly, "just realizing the impropriety of our situation." A hint of color touched Owen's tanned cheeks as well. Nothing improper about saving a life, Miss Zachary, but you're right, we should get you to the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Caldwell, will help get you properly settled. With care, he lifted Elizabeth from the spring and carried her to a patch of sunlight on the grassy bank. Rest here for a moment while I fetch something from my saddlebag. He returned with a worn but clean blanket, which he spread beside her. I'll need to wrap you in this. Your dress is soaked through, and you could catch a chill once the fever breaks completely. Elizabeth nodded, attempting to maintain her dignity despite the circumstances. Owen helped her onto the blanket, then carefully wrapped it around her, covering her wet clothing. Can you sit on the horse if I support you? He asked. I believe so, Elizabeth replied, her voice stronger than before. The water, it's helping. Owen lifted her onto his horse once more, then mounted behind her, keeping her securely wrapped in the blanket. My ranch is just over that ridge, he said, pointing to a gentle slope beyond the canyon. We'll have you comfortable in no time. As they rode, Elizabeth found herself leaning into Owen's solid presence, her body still weak but her mind increasingly clear. You said you found me on the southern trail. Were you heading somewhere? Owen shook his head. Just patrolling. We've had troubles with coyotes and the occasional desperate drifter lately. Lucky thing I chose today to check that stretch. Lucky indeed, Elizabeth murmured. I was beginning to think I'd never make it to Colorado City. The town's been looking forward to your arrival, Owen said. Haven't had a proper teacher in almost a year. The children have been running wild. Despite her condition, Elizabeth smiled. Well, I intended to make a good first impression. This certainly wasn't what I had planned. Owen's chuckle rumbled against her back. Don't you worry about that. Once you're recovered, you'll have plenty of time to win them over. They crested the ridge, and Elizabeth gasped softly. Below them stretched a well-maintained ranch, a sturdy two-story house painted white with green trim, a large red barn, several corrals and outbuildings arranged in a neat pattern. Fields of grazing cattle extended to the west, while the east held what looked like wheat fields ripening in the summer sun. Welcome to Everett Ranch, Owen said, a note of pride in his voice. Been in my family for 20 years now. It's beautiful, Elizabeth said sincerely. Despite her weakened state, she could appreciate the obvious care and hard work that had gone into the property. As they approached the house, a plump woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression changed from curiosity to concern as she took in the blanket-wrapped figure in Owen's arms. Owen Everett, what have you brought home now? She called, hurrying down the steps. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Miss Elizabeth Zachary, our new schoolteacher, Owen explained as he dismounted and gently lifted Elizabeth down. Found her collapsed on the southern trail. Poisoned water, I reckon. I took her to the spring, but she needs rest and care. Mrs. Caldwell's face softened immediately. Oh, you poor dear, we've been expecting you in town. Come, let's get you inside and out of those wet clothes. Elizabeth attempted to stand on her own, but swayed dangerously. Without hesitation, Owen swept her into his arms once more and carried her up the porch steps. Second bedroom on the right, Mrs. Caldwell directed. I'll fetch some of my daughter's things for her to wear. She left plenty behind when she married and moved to Denver. Owen carried Elizabeth through the house, a surprisingly comfortable and well-appointed home for a bachelor rancher, and into a pleasant bedroom with floral curtains and a patchwork quilt on the bed. With care, he set her on the edge of the bed. Mrs. Caldwell will take good care of you, he assured her, stepping back. She's been looking after me for 10 years since my pa passed, best healer in these parts too. Elizabeth looked up at him, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Everett, Owen. His blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. No thanks needed, just get well. He paused, then added, I'll fetch the doctor from town too, best to have him check you over. Mrs. Caldwell bustled in with an armful of clothing. Out with you now, Owen, let me tend to Miss Zachary. With a tip of his hat, Owen left, closing the door behind him. Elizabeth immediately felt his absence like a physical thing, which confused her. She'd only just met this man, yet she felt oddly bereft without his reassuring presence. Now then, Mrs. Caldwell said briskly, "Let's get you out of these wet things and into bed proper. You've had quite an ordeal." "The water," Elizabeth said as the housekeeper helped her stand. "It was from a creek crossing about half a day's walk from town. I didn't know." "Alkali Creek, most like, Mrs." Caldwell nodded knowingly as she helped Elizabeth out of her sodden dress. "Nasty business. Looks clear enough but carries minerals that'll tear your inside something fierce. Locals know to avoid it, but newcomers." She clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Will I recover completely?" Elizabeth asked, suddenly afraid. "With rest and plenty of clean water, yes," Mrs. Caldwell assured her. "Owen did right taking you to the spring. That water's special healing properties, I always say. His father found it when he first settled here, back when Owen was just a boy." Once Elizabeth was settled in a clean nightgown and tucked into bed, Mrs. Caldwell brought a pitcher of spring water and a cup to the bedside. "Drink as much as you can stomach," she instructed. "And there's a basin here if you need to be sick again. Don't be embarrassed. Poison needs to come out one way or another." Despite her exhaustion, Elizabeth had questions. "You mentioned Owen's father. Is his mother?" "Passed when he was 14, Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice softening. "Influenza. His pa brought him out here from Missouri after that, built this place from nothing." She adjusted the curtains to block the bright afternoon sun. "Owen's been running it alone since his pa died 10 years back. Does a fine job, too, he seems." "Kind," Elizabeth observed, feeling drowsy as her body demanded rest. Mrs. Caldwell smiled. "That he is. Too kind for his own good sometimes. Now rest, Miss Zachary. Doctor will be here before supper, I expect." Elizabeth meant to thank her, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words, her body desperately needing recovery after its ordeal. When she next awoke, the light in the room had changed to the golden hue of late afternoon. A man with a silver-streaked beard and spectacles was checking her pulse, his weathered face serious. "Ah, you're awake," he said, noting her open eyes. "I'm Dr. Fielding, Miss Zachary. How are you feeling?" Elizabeth took stock of her condition. "Weak, sore, but the burning feeling has subsided." "Good, good," the doctor nodded. "Owen was right to take you to the spring. That water's saved more than one person in this territory. Alkali poisoning's nasty business." "Will I recover in time for the school term?" Elizabeth asked, her sense of duty asserting itself despite her condition, "Doctor." Fielding chuckled. "Dedicated, aren't you? Term starts Monday, doesn't it? That gives you 4 days. If you rest properly and keep drinking clean water, you should be able to manage, though I'd suggest someone stay with you in town for the first week or so, just to be safe." "I have no one," Elizabeth admitted. "I came to Colorado Territory on my own after my parents passed last winter." The doctor's eyes softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. Well, I'm sure we can arrange something. The town's been eagerly awaiting your arrival. Folks will step up to help." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Owen's voice called, "Doctor, how's our patient?" "Come in, Owen," Dr. Fielding called. "She's awake and improving." Owen entered, and Elizabeth was struck again by his presence, tall and broad-shouldered in clean clothes now, his hair damp as if recently washed. He carried a tray with what smelled like chicken broth, and the aroma made Elizabeth's empty stomach growl audibly. "Sounds like you're ready for some of Mrs. Caldwell's broth," Owen said with a smile, setting the tray on the bedside table. Dr. Fielding nodded approvingly. "Start with small amounts. If that stays down, you can try something more substantial in a few hours." He packed his medical bag and stood. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Zachary. Owen can send for me if anything changes before then." "Thank you, Doctor," Elizabeth said sincerely. After the doctor left, Owen helped Elizabeth sit up against the pillows, his touch careful but confident. "Mrs. Caldwell says this broth can bring the dead back to life," he said, placing the tray across her lap. "Though I hope we don't need to test that claim today." Elizabeth smiled at his attempt at humor. "I'm not planning on dying just yet, Mr. Everett. I have 20 children waiting for their education." 23, actually," Owen corrected, pulling a chair beside the bed. "The Johnson twins turned 6 last month, and the Rileys took in their niece from back east." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow as she carefully spooned some broth. "You seem well informed about the school children." A slight flush colored Owen's cheeks. I'm on the town council. We oversee the school. I see, Elizabeth nodded, surprised by how good the simple broth tasted to her deprived body. Then I suppose you'll be evaluating my performance. I've no doubt you'll exceed expectations, Owen said with unexpected seriousness. Anyone who pushes through poisoning to make it to their post on time has the dedication we need. They fell into comfortable conversation as Elizabeth managed to finish half the bowl. Owen told her about Colorado City, founded in 1859 during the Pike's Peak Gold Rush, now a growing community of nearly 800 souls with a proper main street, church, and the school building where she would teach. It's not fancy, he warned, but it's solid. New desks arrived last month. The previous teacher, Mr. Phillips, left rather suddenly after a disagreement with some of the parents. Elizabeth's curiosity was piqued. What kind of disagreement? Owen hesitated. He believed in rather harsh discipline. Broke his stick across young Tommy Wheeler's back for dropping a slate. Tommy's pa is the blacksmith, not a man to cross. Mr. Phillips was lucky to leave with just a broken nose. Elizabeth set down her spoon. I don't believe in breaking sticks across children's backs, but I do believe in discipline and hard work. That's all we ask, Owen said, relief evident in his voice. The children aren't bad, just spirited. They need a firm but fair hand. As the evening progressed, Mrs. Caldwell checked in periodically, clearly pleased to see Elizabeth eating and conversing. By the time the sun set, Elizabeth had managed to eat all the broth and even a small piece of bread, and her strength was slowly returning. You should rest now, Owen said, rising from his chair. Mrs. Caldwell has made up a room for herself just down the hall, so she'll be nearby if you need anything in the night. You're both too kind, Elizabeth said. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Owen shook his head. No repayment necessary, just focus on getting well. He paused at the door. Good night, Miss Zachary. Elizabeth, please, she said impulsively. After all, you've seen me at my worst already. There seems little point in formality now. His smile transformed his serious face, making him suddenly appear younger and almost boyish. Elizabeth, then, sleep well. After he left, Elizabeth lay back against the pillows, her mind trying to make sense of the day's events. This morning, she had been trudging alone toward an uncertain future. Tonight, she was safe in a stranger's home, cared for and comfortable despite her illness. The unlikely turn of events seemed almost providential. Outside her window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the neigh of horses in the corral, the rhythmic chirp of crickets. It was so different from the Boston home she had left behind, yet somehow already felt more welcoming than the cold house that had emptied with her parents' passing. Sleep claimed her once more, but this time it was healing rest rather than feverish unconsciousness. The next morning, Elizabeth woke feeling significantly stronger. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the curtains, and she could smell coffee and bacon from somewhere in the house. Testing her strength, she sat up carefully, pleased to find the room didn't spin around her. A knock at the door was followed by Mrs. Caldwell's cheerful voice. Miss Zachary, are you awake, dear? Yes, please come in, Elizabeth called, smoothing her borrowed nightgown. Mrs. Caldwell entered carrying a tray with a modest breakfast and a steaming cup of coffee. You're looking much improved this morning, she said approvingly. Some color back in your cheeks. I feel better, Elizabeth confirmed. Still weak, but the burning pain is gone. Good, good. Think you might manage a proper bath later. I've had the boys heating water since dawn. Nothing makes a body feel more human than getting properly clean after an illness. The thought of a bath was almost overwhelmingly appealing to Elizabeth. That sounds wonderful. As she ate her breakfast eggs, a small portion of bacon, and a biscuit with honey, Elizabeth grew increasingly aware of the state of her hair and skin. 3 days of travel followed by illness had left her feeling thoroughly disheveled. Mrs. Caldwell, she ventured between bites, what happened to my belongings? I had a carpet bag with my clothes and personal items. Owen went back for them yesterday after the doctor left. Everything's right here, the housekeeper assured her, pointing to Elizabeth's battered carpet bag in the corner of the room. Though I'm afraid your dress from yesterday might be beyond saving, The spring water has minerals that can stain fabric something fierce. It wasn't my best anyway, Elizabeth said, relieved to have her possessions. I wore my traveling clothes, knowing they'd likely be ruined on the journey, after breakfast with Mrs. Caldwell's help, Elizabeth managed to rise from bed and sit in a chair by the window while the housekeeper changed the bedding. Looking out, she could see the ranch in daylight even more impressive than it had appeared yesterday. Several cowboys were working in the corrals, and in a field beyond, she spotted Owen himself, easily recognizable by his height and the way he carried himself. He was helping mend a fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-browned forearms as he worked alongside another man. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and competence that Elizabeth found herself admiring. "He's a good man," Mrs. Caldwell said, noticing the direction of Elizabeth's gaze. "Works alongside his men every day, doesn't just give orders from horseback like some ranchers." "How did he come to be on the town council?" Elizabeth asked. "He seems young for such a position." "Took his father's place after he passed," Mrs. Caldwell explained, efficiently tucking fresh sheets. "The Everetts have always been respected in these parts. Owen's grandfather was one of the first settlers, though he didn't stay. His son Owen's father returned years later to claim the land and build this ranch. And Owen has no family of his own, no wife." The question slipped out before Elizabeth could consider its propriety. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes twinkled knowingly. "No wife. There was a girl from Denver a few years back, daughter of a business associate of his father's. Seemed set on having him, but she couldn't abide ranch life. Lasted exactly 3 months before heading back to her fancy city ways." "I see," Elizabeth murmured, oddly relieved by this information, though she couldn't say why. By midday, Elizabeth had bathed with Mrs. Caldwell's help, washed her hair, and dressed in one of her own simple dresses, a blue cotton with white piping that was practical but flattering. The effort exhausted her more than she expected, and she had to rest afterward, but the feeling of being clean again was worth the fatigue. Dr. Fielding returned in the afternoon and pronounced her recovering admirably. He brought news from town as well. "The school board met this morning when they heard of your arrival and condition," he informed her. "They've arranged temporary accommodations for you with the widow Jenkins once you're well enough to move to town. Her house is just behind the schoolhouse, very convenient, and they've pushed back the start of term by 3 days to give you more time to recover." "That's very kind of them," Elizabeth said, touched by the consideration of people she hadn't even met. "Please convey my gratitude. You can do so yourself," the doctor smiled. "Several of the board members plan to ride out tomorrow to meet you if you're feeling up to visitors." The prospect of meeting her employers while still recovering from illness was daunting, but Elizabeth nodded resolutely. "I'll be ready." After the doctor left, Elizabeth rested again, her body still demanding recovery time despite her improved condition. She woke in the late afternoon to find Owen sitting in the chair by her bed, reading a book. He looked up when she stirred. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said apologetically, closing his book. "You didn't," Elizabeth assured him, struggling to sit up. Owen quickly moved to help her, adjusting her pillows with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "Dr. Fielding says you're improving," he said, resuming his seat. "That's good news." "Thanks to you," Elizabeth said sincerely. "I don't like to think what might have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." Owen's expression grew serious. "Neither do I." A comfortable silence fell between them. Elizabeth noticed the book in his hands, a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. "You enjoy Cooper's work?" she asked, nodding toward the book. Owen glanced down as if surprised to find it still in his hands. "I do, though this was my father's copy originally. I've read it many times. I'm fond of it myself, though I admit to preferring Austen and the Brontes when given the choice." Owen's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've had a thorough education, I take it?" "My father was a professor of literature at a small college in Massachusetts," Elizabeth explained. "He believed daughters deserved the same education as sons would receive. My mother thought it would ruin my chances of making a good match, but she indulged him, and me. And yet you chose to come west to teach in a frontier town, Owen observed. That's quite a change from Massachusetts. Elizabeth's expression sobered. After my parents died of influenza last winter, there was little to keep me there. The house had to be sold to cover my father's debts, and while I had offers of positions at girls' schools back east, I wanted. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I wanted something more. A place where I might make a real difference. Owen nodded as if he understood completely. Colorado City needs someone like you. The children deserve better than they've had. Their conversation continued as the afternoon waned into evening, moving from books to Owen's ranching life to Elizabeth's journey west. She found him surprisingly well-read for a frontier rancher, and he seemed genuinely interested in her views on education. I believe every child can learn, she said passionately, but not every child learns the same way. A good teacher finds the key to each student's mind. And what about discipline? Owen asked, after the incident with Mr. Phillips. Discipline is necessary but should never involve cruelty, Elizabeth stated firmly. There are more effective ways to correct behavior than physical punishment. Owen's approval was evident in his smile. I believe you'll do very well here, Elizabeth Zachary. The next morning brought the promised visitors from town. Elizabeth, feeling much stronger after another night of restful sleep, and Mrs. Caldwell's nourishing food, dressed carefully in her best dress, a forest green that complemented her auburn hair, and allowed Mrs. Caldwell to arrange her hair in a simple but neat style. You look lovely, dear, the housekeeper assured her. No one would guess you were at death's door just 2 days ago. Owen had arranged for the meeting to take place in the ranch house's comfortable parlor rather than Elizabeth's sickroom, a change she appreciated greatly. With Owen's support, she walked slowly down the hallway, her legs still somewhat unsteady but growing stronger. The parlor surprised her with its refinement, well-crafted furniture, bookshelves filled with a substantial library, and even a small piano in one corner. It spoke of taste and education that she hadn't expected to find on a frontier ranch. My mother's, Owen explained, following her gaze to the piano. She insisted on bringing it west when they married, nearly broke the oxen's backs getting it up the mountain passes, according to my father, but he could never deny her anything. Before Elizabeth could respond, the sound of approaching horses announced the visitors. Owen excused himself to greet them, leaving Elizabeth seated in a comfortable armchair near the fireplace, which, despite the summer heat outside, had been lit to take the dampness from the room. Shortly, Owen returned accompanied by 3 men and 1 woman. He made the introductions with formal courtesy. Miss Elizabeth Zachary, may I present Mayor Harold Wilson, Reverend Thomas Clark, Mr. George Mendelssohn, who owns the Mercantile, and Mrs. Abigail Wheeler, all members of our school board. Elizabeth inclined her head politely, wishing she had the strength to stand for proper introductions. I'm honored to meet you all and grateful for your understanding regarding my delayed arrival. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with impressive side whiskers, waved away her concern. When Owen told us of your ordeal, we were just relieved you survived, Miss Zachary. Alkali poisoning is nothing to trifle with. Indeed, agreed the Reverend, a tall, thin man with kind eyes. We're thankful Mr. Everett found you when he did. Mrs. Wheeler, a handsome woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor, studied Elizabeth with sharp eyes. You're younger than we expected, Miss Zachary. The agency mentioned your teaching experience. 3 years at the Fairfield Academy for Girls in Massachusetts, madam, Elizabeth replied steadily, recognizing the concern behind the question. And I assisted my father, who was a professor from a young age. Mrs. Wheeler nodded, apparently satisfied. My son Tommy will be in your class. He's spirited but bright. Elizabeth remembered Owen's mention of Tommy Wheeler and his father's confrontation with the previous teacher. I look forward to meeting him, she said sincerely. Mr. Mendelssohn, a quiet man with thoughtful eyes, spoke next. The schoolhouse has been prepared for your arrival, Miss Zachary. New chalk, slates, and primers were ordered last month, and my wife has arranged some curtains for the windows to brighten the place up a bit. That's very kind, Elizabeth said, touched by the community's efforts. The meeting continued pleasantly, with the board members asking about her teaching philosophy and plans for the school. Elizabeth answered confidently despite her weakened state, and she could see approval growing in their eyes as she spoke. "Well," Mayor Wilson said finally, rising to his feet, "I believe we've found ourselves an excellent teacher. We'll leave you to your recovery, Miss Zachary, and look forward to welcoming you to town once you're fully recovered." As the visitors prepared to leave, Mrs. Wheeler hung back slightly. "Miss Zachary, if I may have a private word," when the others had moved to the porch with Owen, the older woman sat beside Elizabeth. "I understand you'll be staying with Widow Jenkins once you're able to move to town." "Yes, so I've been told," Elizabeth confirmed. Mrs. Wheeler nodded. "Martha Jenkins is a good woman, but her house is small and she's set in her ways. I wanted to offer once you've settled, and if you find the arrangement, confining a room in our home. We have more space since our older boy's married, and it might be more comfortable for a young woman." Elizabeth was surprised by the unexpected kindness. "That's very generous, Mrs. Wheeler. Call it self-interest," the woman said with a wry smile. "My Tommy needs a steady influence. His father spoils him, especially since—" She paused. "Well, since we lost our daughter to scarlet fever 2 years ago, a good teacher living in our home might be beneficial for all concerned." "I'm very sorry for your loss," Elizabeth said softly, "and I appreciate the offer. Let me see how things go with Mrs. Jenkins first, but I'll certainly keep it in mind." Mrs. Wheeler seemed satisfied with this and took her leave with the others, leaving Elizabeth thoughtful. The meeting had gone better than she'd hoped, and the unexpected offer from Mrs. Wheeler suggested the community might be more welcoming than she'd anticipated. Owen returned to the parlor after seeing the visitors off, his expression pleased. "You impressed them," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Especially Abigail Wheeler, which is no small feat. She's particular about who influences the children." "She made me an offer of accommodation," Elizabeth admitted. "Did she now?" Owen looked surprised. "That's unusual. The Wheelers keep to themselves since they lost their daughter. Sarah was only 8. A shadow crossed his face. "The whole town mourned her. Sweetest child you ever met." Elizabeth felt a pang of sympathy. "It must have been devastating for them." "It was," Owen confirmed. "John Wheeler, that's Tommy's father, he wasn't always so quick to anger. Sarah's death changed him. Made him protective of Tommy to the point of, well, you saw what happened with Mr. Phillips." The conversation shifted to the other board members, with Owen providing helpful insights about each one. Mayor Wilson was fair but politically minded. Reverend Clark genuinely cared for education but would expect scripture to be part of the curriculum. Mr. Mendelssohn was quiet but observant, and often the voice of reason in board disagreements. As they talked, Elizabeth found herself increasingly drawn to Owen's thoughtful perspective and dry humor. There was an intelligence behind his frontier manners that surprised and intrigued her. The next 3 days established a pattern. Elizabeth grew stronger each day, progressing from short walks within the house to brief strolls in the garden with Owen or Mrs. Caldwell's support. The poison worked its way out of her system, and by the end of the 3rd day, Dr. Fielding declared her well enough to move to town the following morning, though you'll need to continue resting between school preparations, he cautioned. Your body has been through a significant ordeal. That evening, her last at the Everett Ranch, Elizabeth sat on the porch with Owen after supper, watching the sunset paint the western sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. A comfortable silence had fallen between them, broken only by the distant sounds of ranch life settling down for the night. "I want to thank you properly," Elizabeth said finally, "for saving my life, for your hospitality, for everything." Owen looked at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "You don't owe me any thanks, Elizabeth. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she disagreed gently. "Not everyone would have. Some might have left me by the trail or brought me to town and considered their duty done. You brought me to the spring, to your home, cared for me as if—" She hesitated. "As if I mattered." "You do matter," Owen said, his voice low and sincere. "From the moment I found you on that trail, you mattered." The simple words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Elizabeth felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her recent illness. "I'll miss this place," she admitted, looking out over the ranch. "It's become familiar so quickly." "You're welcome here anytime," Owen told her. "The spring especially, its water did you good once, it might again." "Is it very far from town?" "About 4 miles," Owen replied. "Not a difficult ride, though a bit too far for walking regularly." Elizabeth nodded, a hint of regret in her expression. She hadn't been on a horse in years and wasn't sure when she might have the opportunity again. As if reading her thoughts, Owen added, "I could take you sometime if you'd like, when you're fully recovered." "I'd like that," Elizabeth said, smiling at him, the moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Owen cleared his throat. "I should check on the horses before turning in. Big day tomorrow getting you settled in town." "Of course," Elizabeth nodded, rising from her chair. "Good night, Owen." He hesitated, then with unexpected gentleness, took her hand and pressed it briefly. "Good night, Elizabeth. Sleep well." The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Elizabeth's few belongings were packed into Owen's wagon. Mrs. Caldwell had washed and pressed all her clothes and even added a jar of her special honey and a loaf of freshly baked bread to Elizabeth's carpetbag. "Just a little something to remind you of us," the housekeeper said warmly. "Don't be a stranger now. This place could use a woman's touch more often." The ride into town took less than an hour. Elizabeth sat beside Owen on the wagon seat, drinking in her first proper view of the landscape. Rolling hills gave way to more rugged terrain, with the magnificent Rocky Mountains rising in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "So different from Massachusetts, it grows on you," Owen agreed. "Took me some time to appreciate it when we first arrived. I was a city boy from St. Louis originally." "Really?" Elizabeth turned to him in surprise. "I wouldn't have guessed," Owen smiled. "My father was a businessman there until my mother died. The grief changed him, made him want a completely different life. So he sold everything, bought land out here based on a friend's recommendation, and dragged me west to become a rancher." "Were you angry with him?" Elizabeth asked, curious about this glimpse into Owen's past. "At first," he admitted, "I was 14, had friends and plans, thought my life was over," he chuckled. "Now I can't imagine living anywhere else." Colorado City came into view, a decent-sized frontier town with a main street of substantial buildings, including several brick structures that spoke of permanence and prosperity. Beyond the main businesses stretched residential streets with a mix of modest and more comfortable homes. At the far end of town stood the church, and beside it, a simple but solid building that Elizabeth guessed was the schoolhouse. People on the boardwalks paused to watch as Owen's wagon rolled down Main Street. Many called greetings, and Owen responded with friendly nods and waves. It was clear he was well known and respected. "News travels fast in small towns," Owen explained, noticing Elizabeth's surprise at the attention. "Everyone knows you're arriving today, and they're curious about the new schoolteacher who survived alkali poisoning." Elizabeth straightened her shoulders, aware she was making her first impression on many of her new neighbors. She had chosen her second-best dress for the occasion, a light blue that Mrs. Caldwell had carefully pressed, and her auburn hair was neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. Owen guided the wagon past the main businesses, pointing out the mercantile, the bank, the doctor's office, and other essential establishments. They passed a saloon called the Silver Dollar, where several rough-looking men lounged outside, eyeing the wagon with interest. "That's where most of the trouble in town happens," Owen remarked, his voice dropping slightly. "Best to give it a wide berth, especially after dark." They turned down a side street and soon reached a small, neat house painted yellow with white trim. A gray-haired woman in a crisp apron stood waiting on the porch. "That's Martha Jenkins," Owen said, "widow of the town's first mayor, been here since the beginning." He pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, coming around to help Elizabeth descend. Her legs were steadier now but still not at full strength, and she was grateful for his supporting arm. Mrs. Jenkins, Owen called in greeting. I've brought your new boarder safely to you. About time, the older woman replied, her tone brisk but not unkind. Was beginning to think you might keep her out at that ranch of yours permanently, Owen Everett. A hint of color touched Owen's tanned face, but he replied evenly, Miss Zachary needed proper care after her ordeal. Couldn't have her arriving in town half dead, now could we, Mrs. Jenkins harumphed but descended the steps to extend a hand to Elizabeth. Welcome to Colorado City, Miss Zachary. I've prepared the back bedroom for you. It's small but gets good light for reading. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Jenkins, Elizabeth replied warmly, taking the offered hand. I hope I won't be too much trouble. Less trouble than most, I expect, the widow said, her sharp eyes taking in Elizabeth's pale but composed appearance. Owen, bring the young lady's things in, then be on your way. She needs rest, not your hovering. Owen complied without argument, carrying Elizabeth's carpetbag and a small trunk into the house. When he returned to the porch, he tipped his hat to both women. I'll check in tomorrow, he said, his eyes meeting Elizabeth's. See how you're settling in. Thank you for everything, Mr. Everett, Elizabeth replied, slipping back to formality in Mrs. Jenkins' presence. As Owen's wagon pulled away, Mrs. Jenkins led Elizabeth inside to a small but immaculately kept house. The promised bedroom was indeed tiny but charming, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a small writing desk beneath the window, and a washstand with a blue and white pitcher and basin. It's lovely, Elizabeth said sincerely. It'll do, Mrs. Jenkins replied pragmatically. Now, rules are simple. Breakfast at 6, supper at 6. I don't provide midday dinner as I volunteer at the church most days. You're welcome to use the kitchen to prepare something for yourself. No gentlemen callers in your room, though you may receive visitors in the parlor until 8 in the evening. Rent is due on the 1st of each month, $2.50, which includes meals as mentioned and laundry once a week. That sounds very fair, Elizabeth agreed, mentally calculating the arrangement against her teacher's salary of $40 per month. Mrs. Jenkins studied her for a moment, then her stern expression softened slightly. You've had a rough start in our territory, Miss Zachary. I hope you'll find Colorado City makes up for it with time. We need a good teacher badly. I'll do my best, Elizabeth promised. See that you do. Now rest this afternoon. Tomorrow's soon enough to start at the schoolhouse. The widow was right, Elizabeth needed rest more than she cared to admit. The journey from the ranch, though not long, had taxed her recovering strength. She lay down on the narrow bed and was asleep within minutes. She woke to the sound of quiet conversation from the front of the house. Disoriented at first in the unfamiliar room, Elizabeth took a moment to gather her bearings. Light streaming through the window suggested late afternoon. She had slept for hours. Rising carefully, she straightened her rumpled dress and attempted to tidy her hair before making her way to the parlor. There she found Mrs. Jenkins serving tea to a visitor, Abigail Wheeler. Ah, you're awake, Mrs. Jenkins observed. Mrs. Wheeler came by to see how you're settling in and to bring some information about the school. How kind, Elizabeth said, taking the vacant chair Mrs. Jenkins indicated. Mrs. Wheeler handed her a folder of papers. Class lists, previous lesson plans such as they were, and the school board's expectations for the term. I thought you might appreciate having these to review before Monday. Thank you, this will be very helpful, Elizabeth said, genuinely grateful for the materials. They discussed the school situation over tea, with Mrs. Wheeler providing valuable insights about the students and their families. Elizabeth learned that the age range would be challenging from 6-year-old beginners, 16-year-old boys finishing their education before taking on adult responsibilities. The older boys only attend in winter when ranch work is slower, Mrs. Wheeler explained. And even then, some only come when their fathers insist. I understand, Elizabeth nodded. I'll need to make the most of their limited time by the time Mrs. Wheeler left, promising to send Tommy to escort Elizabeth to the schoolhouse the next day. Elizabeth felt better prepared for the task ahead and more certain that she could meet it successfully. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Despite Dr. Fielding's admonitions to continue resting, Elizabeth threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse and curriculum. Tommy Wheeler proved to be a bright, energetic 10-year-old who appointed himself her unofficial assistant, helping move desks and clean the schoolroom while providing a running commentary on his fellow students. Jimmy Parker can't read too good, but he knows more about tracking than anyone, the boy informed her as they organized books. And Mary Sullivan cries if you look at her wrong, but she does sums faster than anyone. Elizabeth absorbed these tidbits gratefully, building a mental picture of her future students. The schoolhouse itself was better equipped than she had expected, with sturdy desks, a decent blackboard, and even a small library of books, though many were worn nearly to tatters from use. Owen appeared each day, ostensibly on town business but always finding time to check on her progress. He brought small gifts: a new bell for her desk, a polished apple for her lunch, a jar of Mrs. Caldwell's preserves to keep your strength up. His visits quickly became the highlights of Elizabeth's busy days. On Sunday, she attended services at Reverend Clark's church and was formally introduced to the congregation. The warm welcome from most of the town's residents touched her deeply. Children eyed her with cautious curiosity. Parents greeted her respectfully, and several young, unmarried men made rather obvious attempts to catch her attention, attempts that Elizabeth politely but firmly deflected. Owen sat with his ranch foreman several pews behind her, but Elizabeth was acutely aware of his presence throughout the service. When their eyes met during the final hymn, the connection between them felt almost tangible. After the service, as people gathered outside to socialize, Owen made his way to her side. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked, his blue eyes warm with something more than mere neighborly concern. "As ready as I'll ever be," Elizabeth replied, "though I admit to some nerves." "You'll be wonderful," he assured her. "The children are lucky to have you." Before Elizabeth could respond, Tommy Wheeler appeared, tugging at her sleeve. "Miss Zachary, Pa says to tell you we've got dinner waiting if you'd care to join us." Elizabeth glanced up to see John Wheeler, a powerfully built man with his son's same curious eyes, standing nearby. Owen followed her gaze and nodded encouragingly. "You should go," he said. The Wheelers set a good table, and it would be a good chance to speak with Tommy's father before classes begin. Though somewhat reluctant to leave Owen's company, Elizabeth recognized the wisdom of his suggestion. "Another time, perhaps," she said to him quietly before accepting Tommy's escort to his waiting parents. The dinner with the Wheelers proved both delicious and informative. John Wheeler, while gruff, was clearly dedicated to his son's education. When Elizabeth explained her teaching philosophy, emphasizing encouragement over punishment, the blacksmith's stern expression relaxed noticeably. "Mr. Phillips believed fear taught respect," he said, his voice rumbling with lingering anger. "I believe respect is earned." "As do I, Mr. Wheeler," Elizabeth agreed. "Children learn best when they feel safe and valued." By the time she returned to Mrs. Jenkins' house that evening, Elizabeth felt more confident about facing her first day of teaching. She reviewed her lesson plans one final time before seeking her bed early, wanting to be well rested for the challenges ahead. Monday dawned clear and bright. Elizabeth dressed with care in her best teaching dress, a deep green with modest white collar and cuffs, and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. Mrs. Jenkins provided a hearty breakfast and a packed lunch, along with brisk encouragement. "You'll do fine," the older woman said as Elizabeth prepared to leave. "Just remember, start as you mean to go on. Don't let them see weakness on the first day." The school bell rang at 8 o'clock, its clear tone carrying across the town. Elizabeth stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, watching as children of various ages made their way toward her, some eager, others dragging their feet, all curious about their new teacher. By 8:15, 23 students had found their seats, arranged by age and ability according to the lists Mrs. Wheeler had provided. Elizabeth surveyed the faces before her, from tiny Sarah Miller with her thumb halfway to her mouth, to lanky Ben Cooper, who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else, and took a deep breath. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and confident despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I am Miss Zachary, and I'm very pleased to meet all of you." The school day passed in a whirlwind of assessments, introductions, and establishing routines. Elizabeth discovered that Mrs. Wheeler had been right. The abilities of her students varied widely, even among those of similar ages. Some of the older children read fluently, while others struggled with basic letters. Some calculated complex sums easily, while others counted laboriously on their fingers. By the end of the day, Elizabeth was exhausted but exhilarated. Most of the children had responded well to her approach, though a few would clearly require more time to win over. As she dismissed the class, several of the younger girls lingered to present her with wildflowers they had picked at lunchtime, while Tommy Wheeler proudly showed her a slate where he had practiced his letters during free time. Elizabeth was erasing the blackboard when a knock at the open door made her turn. Owen stood there, his tall frame silhouetted against the late afternoon light. "Thought I might walk you back to Mrs. Jenkins," he said, stepping inside. "First days can be tiring." Elizabeth couldn't help the smile that spread across her face at the sight of him. "That's very kind," she said, "and yes, I am rather tired, though it was a good day." "The children behaved, mostly," she laughed. "There were a few testing moments, but nothing I couldn't handle." Owen helped her gather her books and papers, then offered his arm for the walk back through town. The gesture was old-fashioned but welcome, especially as Elizabeth's energy was indeed flagging after the demanding day. "I'd like to take you to the spring this weekend," Owen said as they walked. "If you're feeling up to it, the ride isn't difficult and the water would do you good." "I'd like that," Elizabeth replied, genuinely pleased by the invitation. As they approached Mrs. Jenkins' house, Owen slowed his pace. "Elizabeth," he began, then hesitated. "I've been thinking." Whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the appearance of Mrs. Jenkins on her porch. "There you are, Miss Zachary. I was beginning to wonder if those children had worn you out completely on your first day." Owen released Elizabeth's arm reluctantly. "Another time," he murmured before tipping his hat to Mrs. Jenkins. "Evening, madam. Just making sure our teacher got home safely. Very gentlemanly of you," the widow replied with a knowing look between them. "Good night, Mr. Everett." The week passed quickly, each day bringing new challenges and rewards in the classroom. Elizabeth found herself falling into a comfortable routine, teaching by day, preparing lessons in the evening, and enjoying brief conversations with Owen whenever their paths crossed in town. By Saturday, she felt more at home in Colorado City than she had expected to be after such a short time. The community had welcomed her, the children were responding to her teaching methods, and she had even begun to appreciate Mrs. Jenkins' gruff but well-intentioned oversight. Owen arrived promptly at 9 that morning with 2 horses, his own chestnut mare, and a gentle-looking bay gelding. "Thought you might enjoy the ride more on your own mount," he explained as he helped her into the saddle. "This is Copper. He belongs to Mrs. Caldwell, but she rarely rides these days." The day was perfect for riding, clear and warm, but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains. Elizabeth hadn't been on horseback in years, but the skill returned quickly, and she soon found herself enjoying the freedom of movement after days confined to the schoolhouse and Mrs. Jenkins' small house. "You ride well," Owen observed as they left the town behind, heading toward his ranch but taking a different trail than the wagon road. "My grandfather kept horses," Elizabeth explained. "I spent summers with him as a child and learned to ride then. I've had few opportunities in recent years, though." The trail wound through rolling hills, occasionally dipping into shallow valleys where wildflowers carpeted the ground in splashes of color. Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, the old trapper's cabin now abandoned, the ridge where he'd once tracked a mountain lion, the distant peak named for a gold prospector who'd claimed to find a fortune there but died before revealing its location. They reached the spring by midday. It looked even more beautiful to Elizabeth now that she could truly appreciate it, the clear pool reflecting the sky, surrounded by lush grass and sheltered by cottonwood trees whose leaves whispered in the breeze. Owen spread a blanket in the shade and unpacked a picnic lunch that Mrs. Caldwell had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and a jar of fresh lemonade. "This is wonderful," Elizabeth said, settling on the blanket and accepting a tin plate from Owen. "Thank you for bringing me here again. My memories of the first visit are rather hazy." "Understandably," Owen smiled, sitting beside her. "You were more dead than alive when I found you." They ate in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the peaceful setting and delicious food. After lunch, Owen led Elizabeth to the edge of the spring. "Cup your hands," he instructed, demonstrating. "The water tastes best drunk directly from the source." Elizabeth followed his example, dipping her cupped hands into the crystal clear water and bringing them to her lips. The water was cold and sweet, with a mineral quality that tasted of the earth itself, clean and pure. "It's wonderful," she said after drinking her fill. "I can see why you believe it has healing properties." "My father always said it was touched by something special," Owen replied, looking at the spring thoughtfully. He wasn't a superstitious man, but he believed this place was blessed somehow. They sat on the rocks beside the pool, talking easily about Elizabeth's first week of teaching, Owen's ranch responsibilities, and their backgrounds. Elizabeth learned that Owen had been engaged briefly in St. Louis before coming west a lifetime ago, he said dismissively, while she shared more about her parents and her life in Massachusetts. "I've never regretted coming west," Owen told her as the afternoon shadows lengthened. "Not even in the hardest times. There's something about this land that gets into your blood." "I'm beginning to understand that," Elizabeth admitted, looking out over the landscape. "It's beautiful in a way that's completely different from the East. Wilder, yes, but also more honest somehow." Owen's eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that made her breath catch. "That's exactly it, more honest, like you can't hide from yourself out here." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Elizabeth found herself wondering what it would be like to be kissed by this man, this kind, thoughtful rancher who had saved her life and continued to care for her well-being. Owen seemed to read her thoughts, for he leaned slightly toward her, his eyes dropping to her lips. Elizabeth held perfectly still, her heart racing with anticipation. The sharp cry of a hawk overhead broke the moment. Owen drew back, clearing his throat. "We should head back soon," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Don't want to have Mrs. Jenkins worrying." Elizabeth nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course." As they packed up the remains of their picnic and prepared to leave, Owen suddenly caught her hand. "Elizabeth," he said, his expression serious, "I'd like to call on you properly, if you're agreeable." The formal request, so unexpected yet so welcome, brought a flush of pleasure to Elizabeth's cheeks. "I'd like that very much, Owen." His smile transformed his face, making him look younger and boyishly pleased. "Good, that's good." The ride back to town was filled with conversation that flowed even more easily now that their intentions toward each other had been acknowledged. By the time they reached Mrs. Jenkins' house, Elizabeth felt as if she'd known Owen for years rather than mere weeks. As he helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary, Owen said quietly, "I'll come by tomorrow after church if that's acceptable." "Very acceptable," Elizabeth replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. Mrs. Jenkins watched their farewell from the window, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When Elizabeth entered the house, the older woman merely raised an eyebrow. "Had a pleasant ride, did you?" "Very pleasant," Elizabeth confirmed, not elaborating despite her landlady's obvious curiosity. "HMPH, Mrs. Jenkins sniffed. "Owen Everett's a good man, best catch in the territory. Half the unmarried women between here and Denver have set their caps for him over the years." "Is that so?" Elizabeth replied noncommittally, hanging her bonnet on the hook by the door. "It is," the widow confirmed. "Never showed much interest in any of them, though. Interesting that he's suddenly taken to riding out with our new schoolteacher." Elizabeth couldn't help the blush that rose to her cheeks. "We're just friends, Mrs. Jenkins. For now," the older woman said with surprising perception. "But that's how the best marriages start, in my experience." The word marriage sent a flutter through Elizabeth's stomach. It was far too soon to be thinking of such things, and yet, there was something about Owen that made the notion less frightening than it might have been with anyone else. True to his word, Owen appeared the following afternoon, freshly shaved and wearing his Sunday best. Mrs. Jenkins admitted him to the parlor with poorly concealed satisfaction, then made herself scarce, though Elizabeth suspected she wasn't far from earshot. Their courtship proceeded with proper decorum but genuine affection over the following weeks. Owen called regularly, taking Elizabeth for walks after school, bringing small gifts, and occasionally escorting her to community events. They returned to the spring several times, each visit strengthening the special connection they both felt to the place where their relationship had begun, where he had saved her life and, in a way, given her a new one. As autumn approached, bringing cooler weather and changing the landscape to rich golds and reds, their feelings for each other deepened. Elizabeth found herself thinking of Owen throughout her teaching day, looking forward to their time together with an eagerness that sometimes distracted her from her duties. For his part, Owen began appearing in town more frequently on ranch business that somehow always coincided with the end of the school day. The town noticed, of course. Small communities miss nothing, especially potential romances. Most reactions were positive. Owen was respected, and Elizabeth had quickly proven herself a dedicated and effective teacher. A few young men who had harbored hopes regarding the pretty new schoolteacher withdrew their attention, and one or two young women looked on with poorly disguised envy. But overall, the community seemed to approve of the match. In late September, as they walked by the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse, Owen stopped beneath a cottonwood tree whose leaves had turned bright gold in the autumn light. Taking both of Elizabeth's hands in his, he looked into her eyes with uncharacteristic nervousness. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice gruff with emotion, "I know we haven't known each other long, but I can't remember what my life was like before you came into it. These past months have been the happiest I can recall." Elizabeth's heart began to race, hope and joy rising within her. "For me as well, Owen," he took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say not very well, I'm afraid, is that I love you. I think I started loving you that day by the trail when you were fighting so hard to live, and every day since has only made me more certain." Tears of happiness welled in Elizabeth's eyes. "I love you too, Owen, so much." The smile that lit his face was like sunrise after a long night. Gently, he drew her closer and lowered his head to hers. Their first kiss was tender, a soft meeting of lips that spoke of reverence and promise. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I want to ask you properly," he murmured, "but I'm afraid it's too soon. I don't want to rush you." Elizabeth lifted a hand to his cheek, marveling at the strength and gentleness in this man who had become so dear to her. "It's not too soon," she assured him. "Not when you know it's right." Taking her words as the encouragement they were meant to be, Owen stepped back slightly and, to Elizabeth's surprise and delight, lowered himself to one knee. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "Elizabeth Zachary," he said solemnly, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, joy making her voice tremble. "Yes, Owen, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the autumn sunlight. "It was my mother's," he explained as he rose to his feet. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found someone special." "It's beautiful," Elizabeth whispered, admiring the way the ring sat perfectly on her finger, as if meant to be there all along. "I'll treasure it always." Their second kiss was deeper, a sealing of promises and a hint of the passion they would share as husband and wife. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "When?" Owen asked simply. Elizabeth considered. The school term would continue until Christmas, with a 2-week break before the winter term began in January. "The Christmas holiday," she suggested. "It would give us time to prepare, and I wouldn't need to disrupt the school schedule." Owen nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Christmas it is. That gives us almost 3 months. Is that enough time?" "More than enough," Elizabeth assured him, though in truth she would have married him tomorrow if it were possible. They walked back to town hand in hand, stopping first at the Wheelers' home to share their news with Abigail, who had become a friend to Elizabeth. The blacksmith's wife embraced them both, genuine pleasure in her usually reserved demeanor. "I knew it," she declared. "From the first time I saw you together, didn't I tell you John Wheeler, emerging from his workshop wiping soot from his hands, offered gruff congratulations. "You're getting a good woman, Everett," he said, shaking Owen's hand. "And you," he added to Elizabeth, "are getting a man worth having. Don't see many of those out here." Mrs. Jenkins received the news with satisfaction but little surprise. "About time," she sniffed, though her eyes were kind as she examined Elizabeth's ring. "I was beginning to think he'd never work up the courage to ask." Word spread quickly through the small community. By the following day, Elizabeth was receiving congratulations from her students and their parents. The school board, led by Mayor Wilson, formally approved her continued employment after the wedding, though we'll need to find a replacement when the babies start coming. The mayor added with a wink that made Elizabeth blush furiously. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a whirl of teaching duties and wedding preparations. Elizabeth wrote to her few remaining relatives back east, knowing they wouldn't be able to attend but wanting to share her happiness nonetheless. Owen began making improvements to the ranch house, adding a larger bookcase to accommodate Elizabeth's collection and renovating the master bedroom with fresh paint and new curtains. Mrs. Caldwell was beside herself with joy at the news, embracing Elizabeth tearfully when she next visited the ranch. "I've prayed for this," the housekeeper confessed. "For years I've prayed he'd find someone worthy of him, and here you are the answer to those prayers." The women of the town, led by Abigail Wheeler, organized a quilting bee to create a wedding gift, a magnificent quilt in blues and greens that would grace the bed Elizabeth would soon share with Owen. The men, not to be outdone, presented Owen with a newly crafted desk for Elizabeth's use, built by John Wheeler himself from polished pine with intricate carvings along the edges. As the wedding day approached, Elizabeth divided her time between concluding the school term, packing her belongings for the move to the ranch, and final preparations for the ceremony. Owen rode into town almost daily, often staying for supper with Elizabeth and Mrs. Jenkins, the three of them discussing plans for the future. "You'll need help out there," Mrs. Jenkins insisted one evening. "That ranch is too much for one woman to manage alongside teaching duties." "Mrs. Caldwell will stay on," Owen assured her. "And Elizabeth will only teach until the end of the school year in May. After that, we'll see." The implication that by the following school year, Elizabeth might have other responsibilities that would prevent her from teaching brought a blush to her cheeks, but a warm glow of anticipation to her heart. The thought of children, of building a family with Owen, filled her with joy. The wedding was set for December 23rd, allowing them a few days of privacy at the ranch before the traditional New Year's gathering Owen hosted annually for his ranch hands and neighbors. The ceremony would take place in the church, followed by a celebration in the town hall. It seemed half the territory had been invited, a fact that both alarmed and touched Elizabeth. "Everyone wants to wish us well," Owen explained when she expressed surprise at the extensive guest list. "And they're curious about the woman who finally caught the confirmed bachelor." "Is that how they see you?" Elizabeth teased. "A confirmed bachelor brought low by the schoolteacher," Owen pulled her close, his eyes warm with love. "Brought high, not low," he corrected softly. "You've given me a happiness I never expected to find, Elizabeth." The day before the wedding, Elizabeth closed the schoolhouse for the Christmas break, accepting hugs and small handmade gifts from her students with genuine affection. In just a few months, these children had become dear to her, their progress and well-being important beyond mere professional duty. That evening, as she packed the last of her belongings in Mrs. Jenkins' back bedroom, the widow appeared in the doorway with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Wedding gift," she said gruffly, holding it out. "Nothing fancy, but I thought you might like to have it." Elizabeth unwrapped the paper to find a small, leather-bound book, a journal with blank pages and a delicate pen tucked inside. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "Thank you." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her usually stern expression softening. "Marriage is a journey worth recording," she said. "Robert, my husband, and I kept journals our first year together. Read them often after he passed. Memories fade, but words written in the moment, those stay true." Touched by both the gift and the rare personal disclosure, Elizabeth impulsively embraced the older woman. After a moment's surprise, Mrs. Jenkins returned the hug briefly before stepping back. "You'll do well together, you and Owen," she said with unusual gentleness. "He's a good man, and you're stronger than you look. That matters out here." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sky a brilliant blue above the snow-dusted landscape. Abigail Wheeler arrived early to help Elizabeth dress in her wedding gown, a creation of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered from Denver and altered to fit perfectly. "You look beautiful," Abigail said, securing the last pin in Elizabeth's hair, which she had arranged in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers. "Owen won't know what hit him." The church was filled to capacity when Elizabeth arrived, escorted by John Wheeler, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father. Through the doors, she could see the backs of the assembled guests, and at the altar, Owen's tall figure standing beside Reverend Clark. "Ready?" John asked, offering his arm. Elizabeth nodded, a sense of perfect certainty filling her. "More than ready." The music began, Mrs. Fielding at the small organ playing the traditional wedding march. As the doors opened fully and Elizabeth stepped into the church on John's arm, the congregation rose to its feet, turning to watch her progress down the aisle. But Elizabeth saw only Owen. He had turned at the sound of the doors opening, and the expression on his face as he beheld his bride for the first time would remain in her memory forever: wonder, joy, and a love so profound it seemed to illuminate him from within. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Elizabeth was aware of Reverend Clark's solemn words, of the responses she and Owen gave, of the moment when Owen slipped a second ring onto her finger to join her engagement band, a simple gold circle that symbolized their unending commitment. But most of all, she was aware of Owen's hands holding hers, strong and steady, and his eyes never leaving her face. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared at last. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Owen's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, appropriate for a church setting yet conveying the depth of his feelings. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Everett for the first time, the cheers and applause that greeted them reflected the community's genuine joy in their union. The celebration afterward was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food prepared by the town's women, music from local fiddlers, dancing, laughter, and more than a few tears from sentimental guests. Elizabeth found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, receiving advice, congratulations, and occasionally ribald comments that made her blush but also laugh. Through it all, she remained aware of Owen's presence, his hand at the small of her back as they greeted guests, his proud smile as he introduced her as "my wife," his eyes finding hers across the room with private messages of love and impatience for their time alone. As the winter afternoon faded toward evening, they finally took their leave amid good-natured teasing and a shower of rice. Owen had prepared the wagon for their journey to the ranch, lining it with blankets against the cold and packing away the gifts they had received. They rode in companionable silence for a time, Elizabeth nestled against Owen's side beneath a heavy buffalo robe, watching the landscape turn silver in the rising moonlight. The ranch buildings appeared on the horizon, windows glowing with welcoming light misses. Caldwell had prepared the house for their arrival before discreetly departing to stay with her sister in town for a few days. "Welcome home, Mrs. Everett," Owen said softly as they approached, the new name sending a thrill through Elizabeth. "Home," she repeated, the word filled with meaning beyond its simple syllable. After months of transition and uncertainty, she had found not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. Owen drew the wagon to a halt before the house, then turned to his bride with unexpected solemnity. "I have a tradition to uphold," he informed her, his eyes twinkling despite his serious tone. And before Elizabeth could ask what tradition he meant, he had lifted her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home. The house was warm and inviting, with fires burning in the parlor and bedroom hearths. A simple supper waited on the dining table: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine, but neither was hungry for food. With gentle hands, Owen helped Elizabeth remove her cloak and bonnet. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, his fingers lingering on the pins in her hair, carefully removing them until the auburn waves fell loose around her shoulders. "I've imagined this moment more times than I can count." Elizabeth reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with wondering fingers. "As have I," she admitted, "from that first day at the spring when you cared for me with such gentleness." His kiss was different now, deeper, more urgent, yet still restrained by his innate consideration for her. "I want to do this right," he whispered against her lips. "I want it to be perfect for you." "It already is," Elizabeth assured him, her own desire rising to meet his. "Because it's you, Owen." "It's us." He lifted her into his arms once more and carried her to the bedroom that would now be theirs. With reverent care, he helped her out of her wedding gown, his breath catching as each layer was removed to reveal the woman he had pledged his life to. Elizabeth, though modest by nature, found herself unashamed before his loving gaze, her trust in him complete. Their union was everything both had hoped for: tender yet passionate, a perfect blending of bodies and hearts. As they lay together afterward, the moonlight casting silver patterns across the bed through the curtains, Elizabeth felt a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you crying?" Owen asked with concern, drawing her closer against his chest. "Did I hurt you?" "No," she assured him quickly. "These are happy tears. I'm just overwhelmed by how perfect this is, how right." He pressed a kiss to her hair, his arms secure around her. "I was thinking the same thing. It's as if everything in my life, every choice, every hardship, every success was leading me to you." "Even finding the spring," Elizabeth mused, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin, "if your father hadn't discovered it all those years ago." "Then I wouldn't have known to take you there when you fell ill," Owen completed her thought. "And you might not have survived." The sobering possibility made them hold each other tighter, grateful for the circumstances that had brought them together against such odds. "I believe some things are meant to be," Owen said softly. "That spring was waiting for us in a way, waiting to bring us together." In the days and weeks that followed, Elizabeth and Owen settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised and delighted them both. The transition from independent teacher to rancher's wife brought challenges. Certainly, Elizabeth had much to learn about managing a ranch household. And Owen had to adjust to sharing his long bachelor spaces, but their deep compatibility and willingness to compromise eased the way. Elizabeth continued teaching through the winter and spring terms, riding to town each morning with Owen when weather permitted, or staying with Mrs. Jenkins during the worst winter storms when the trail was impassable. Her students thrived under her consistent care, and the school board expressed hope that she might reconsider her decision to resign at the end of the school year. "We could hire an assistant," Mayor Wilson suggested, "someone to take over when circumstances change." His meaningful glance at Elizabeth's still flat stomach made clear what circumstances he anticipated. But by April, those circumstances had indeed begun to change. Dr. Fielding confirmed what Elizabeth had begun to suspect: a child would arrive in late October, just before their first wedding anniversary. The news brought Owen to his knees beside her chair, his face pressed against her still unchanged body, his voice choked with emotion. "A child," he whispered in wonder. "Our child." Elizabeth ran her fingers through his hair, her own joy too great for words. She had wanted this, hoped for it, but the reality still seemed miraculous. That evening, as spring rain pattered against the windows, they rode to the spring despite the weather. Standing beside the clear pool where their story had begun, They shared their private joy with the place that had saved Elizabeth's life, and now would witness the continuation of that life through their child. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter," Owen said, his arm secure around Elizabeth's waist. "As long as the baby is healthy and has your spirit. And your kindness," Elizabeth added, leaning into his embrace, "your strength." The summer passed in peaceful anticipation. Elizabeth concluded her teaching duties in May, handing the school over to Miss Patterson, a capable young woman from Denver who had been secured as her replacement. The town gave Elizabeth a farewell party, the children presenting her with handmade gifts and cards that brought tears to her eyes. "You'll be missed, Mrs. Everett," Reverend Clark said, speaking for the community. "But we understand that your priorities have changed. Know that there will always be a place for you at our school when you're ready to return." As her body changed with the advancing pregnancy, Elizabeth found new rhythms to her days. She worked alongside Mrs. Caldwell in managing the ranch house, learned to ride safely despite her growing belly, and spent hours preparing the nursery in what had once been a guest room adjacent to the master bedroom. Owen's protectiveness increased with each passing month, sometimes to Elizabeth's amusement and occasionally to her frustration. "I'm with child not made of glass," she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. "Humor me," he would reply, taking the basket anyway. "I've waited too long for this happiness to take any chances with it." In early October, as Elizabeth's time grew near, they hosted a small gathering at the ranch. The Wheelers, Mrs. Jenkins, Dr. and Mrs. Fielding, and a few other close friends from town. The evening was filled with good food, laughter, and not a small amount of advice for the expectant parents. "Sleep when the baby sleeps," Mrs. Fielding counseled Elizabeth. "That's the only way to survive the first months. And don't worry if you feel overwhelmed sometimes," Abigail Wheeler added more quietly. "Every mother does, no matter what they might say." The men offered Owen cigars and teasing warnings about sleepless nights ahead, which he accepted with good humor. But later, when the guests had departed and they were preparing for bed, he confessed his nervousness to Elizabeth. "What if I'm not good at this?" he asked, his hand gentle on her rounded belly where their child moved restlessly. "Being a father, I mean. My own father tried his best, but he was grieving my mother working to establish the ranch. There wasn't much time for teaching me how to be a parent." Elizabeth covered his hand with her own. "You'll be wonderful," she assured him. "Look how you care for your ranch hands, how you help neighbors in need, how you nurture this land. That same care and dedication will make you an excellent father." Her words seemed to ease his concerns, and he kissed her tenderly. "What did I do to deserve you?" he murmured against her hair. "You saved me," Elizabeth replied simply, "in more ways than just that day on the trail." Their son arrived on a clear, cold night in late October after a labor that tested Elizabeth's strength but never her determination. Owen remained by her side throughout, defying convention at his wife's insistence, his steadfast presence giving her courage when the pain seemed unbearable. "One more push," Dr. Fielding encouraged as dawn approached. "The baby's almost here." With a final, monumental effort, Elizabeth brought their child into the world. The lusty cry that filled the room moments later was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "A boy," Dr. Fielding announced, placing the squalling infant on Elizabeth's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Owen's face, when Elizabeth looked up at him, was transformed by wonder and love. Tears streaked unashamedly down his cheeks as he gazed at his wife and newborn son. "He's perfect," he whispered. "You're both perfect." They named him William Thomas Everett William for Elizabeth's father and Thomas for Owen's. From his first days, it was clear he had inherited his mother's determined spirit and his father's observant nature. His eyes, initially the blue of all newborns, soon settled into a shade between his parents, a clear hazel that seemed to take in everything around him with unusual focus. As winter settled over the ranch, the new family established their own routines. Elizabeth recovered quickly from the birth. her natural vitality reasserting itself despite the demands of caring for an infant. Owen proved to be an attentive father, willingly taking his turn with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, often walking the floor with his son in the early hours when William was fussy, singing old trail songs in his deep, soothing voice. Their first Christmas as parents was quiet but deeply meaningful. They took William to the spring on Christmas Eve, bundled against the cold, to introduce him formally to the place that had brought his parents together. "This spring saved your mother's life," Owen told the sleeping infant as they stood beside the ice-rimmed pool. "And in saving her, it gave me the greatest gifts I could ever receive, her love and you." Elizabeth leaned against her husband's side, her heart too full for words. The year had brought changes she could never have imagined as she trudged along that dusty trail toward Colorado City, sick and alone. Now she had a husband she adored, a healthy son, a home filled with love, and a future bright with promise. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether to Owen, the spring, or some higher power she couldn't have said. Perhaps to all three, Owen's arm tightened around her shoulders. "No, my love, it is I who should thank you for surviving, for staying, for loving me and giving me our son." The spring bubbled quietly beside them, eternal and unchanging amid the seasons of their lives. As they turned to head back to the ranch, the setting sun broke through the winter clouds, casting a golden light across the landscape, illuminating the path that had brought them together and the future they would build, side by side.